Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. Though looking at my picture, you might think where I am, it's the middle of the night. I can inform you that it is actually 10 o'clock in the morning where I am, and it is just rather dark given the fact that it's November. But thank you so much for joining this morning to the All Party Parliamentary Group for Gypsy, Traveller and Roma, and the Roma Support Group to discuss issues the Roma community face in terms of the EU settlement scheme. My name is Martin Docherty-Hughes. I'm a Member of Parliament for West Dumbartonshire. I'm the co-chair along with my friend Baroness Janet Whittaker, and Janet is here. I don't know if Janet, would you like to say just a few words of welcome to everybody this morning? So if you would, that would be fantastic.
For this really important meeting, this is a very lively scene for very many people from the Roma community, and it's essential that we find a way through the Home Office inspired labyrinths. So I won't say any more because you're going to hear some real experts on the subject, but I wish you all well. I may not be able to stay until the end of the meeting, but I shall follow it all in due course. So I add my thanks to everybody for coming, and particularly to the speakers.
Thank you, Janet, and being here, your support for the All Party Parliamentary Group. You've maintained the All Party Parliamentary Group, and I think all the members and the communities are extremely grateful for everything you've done to make sure there's a parliamentary presence and voice. Without further ado, I think it's really important we head towards the speakers. I know for many of these events, what we usually do for lobby events, for example, is that we will have the opportunity of maybe one or two speakers and then go straight into some members who may want to say some things before they head off to other meetings. If there are members who would like to say something, if you could just raise your virtual hand, it would be very much appreciated. It does allow myself and the Secretariat to recognise that you want maybe to say something before heading to another meeting. I'm very grateful for Chris Desira, who's an immigration solicitor and director of Seraphus. He provides advice via the Free Movement website and is a special advisor on Brexit-related immigration issues for the European Union delegation to the UK. Chris is also trustee of the charity Settled, which works with vulnerable EU, EEA and Swiss citizens and their family members, and he's going to be our first speaker this morning. So Chris, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Martin, for that lovely introduction, and welcome everyone this morning. As a lawyer, I'm probably going to get quite legalistic during my talk, and I'm going to focus on a particular subject which will adversely impact the Roma and the people that we're talking about today much more than many other EU citizens, and that's what their lawful status will be for the first 6 months of next year, and also potentially what their lawful status will be beyond July next year, even if they've made an application to the EU settlement scheme. So it might get very technical, so feel free to ask questions afterwards when you're given the opportunity. So by way of an introduction, we all know, as it's been beaten across our heads quite a lot by this government, is that free movement will end at 11:01 on the 31st of December this year. This effectively means that from this time and date, EU, EEA, Swiss citizens, and from now on I'm just going to say EU citizens, but I'm referring to all categories of citizenships when I do, who wish to move to the UK for the first time to work or study from that date and time will have to meet the requirements of the new immigration system. If they want to work here, they'll have to apply for a visa. If they want to study here, they'll have to apply for a visa and pay all of the costs associated with that. EU citizens wishing to visit the UK will be able to do so visa-free, although they'll be granted a visitor status on arrival, and that may present problems for them later on from July onwards if they don't stick to the requirements of that visitor visa. But that's a side topic. We're here to talk about affected people under the EU settlement scheme. So those existing residents, those who are here already residing in the UK before 11:01 PM on the 31st of December this year, will be able to apply to the EU settlement scheme by the 30th of June 2021. So in the first 6 months of next year, we have a period in which EU citizens will have various immigration statuses, depending on their various permissions to be in the UK. And this will be substantially different between those residing in the UK before 11 PM on 31st December 2020 and those who arrive after that date and time. So there will also be particularly a group of EU citizens who have yet to apply to the EU settlement scheme, although they're eligible to make that application. And so they will be living in the UK for the first 6 months without an immigration status. So the question will be, what would be their immigration status during that first 6 months and until such time they're granted a status under the EU settlement scheme? The government's response to that is by introducing the citizens' rights and in brackets application, deadline and temporary protection, close brackets, EU exit regulations 2020. These regulations give and protect lawful residence for many EU citizens during the first 6 months of next year and until such time they're granted an EU settlement status. But they will also not protect some EU citizens, and this may affect the Roma quite a bit. So why do we have this first 6 months of 2021 where we've got this buffer between the end of free movement and the deadline to the EU settlement scheme? Well, this 6 months extra time, so to speak, was catered for in the EU-UK withdrawal agreement. The idea for this buffer is that there was a fear that an end to free movement will be a really difficult and hard cliff edge for EU citizens. And many of them will not know that the end of free movement has occurred and also ends their lawful residence to be in the UK. So the withdrawal agreement provided a minimum 6 month buffer to allow people to apply for a resident status. Once they realise free movement has ended, they've got that time to do so. 6 months is the minimum catered for in the withdrawal agreement. The UK has chosen to exercise the minimum 6 months, but the withdrawal agreement catered for a much longer periods should the UK government have chosen to do that. So even though it's the minimum period of 6 months, it's still vitally important because there's going to be many people who actually don't realise free movement is ending at the end of this year and may realise through the course of their daily events in the early part of next year that something has occurred, something has changed, and they may realise that something that has changed will affect their residence in the UK, and that may signpost them to the EU settlement scheme. And also because, as we all know, we just don't know how many EU citizens are living in the UK. The numbers applying are now far in excess of the numbers we thought were here. And there will be a point in time when the Home Office will realise that actually the numbers applying, the number of applications received far exceeds their reasonable expectations of the number of applications they really expected to receive. And then there will be a point in time where they'll realise that actually they're receiving far too many and there may be a significant issue here. But this is particularly evident for the Roma because they're less inclined to be in contact with organisations, are less inclined to be in contact with lines of authority. And so it's even more difficult to really fully grasp how many people are living here. It's difficult to quantify because they're spread over a number of EU nationalities and they're also spread geographically across the UK. So it makes quantifying the Roma and the people we're talking about today even more difficult than any other EU nationality or persons. And many of the Roma erroneously believe the scheme does not apply to them, or even they choose not to apply to the scheme at all, which is appearing to be more and more of a concern, because we're receiving many reports of Roma with national ID cards rather than passports being reluctant to engage with the EU settlement scheme because their type of national ID card is required to be sent to the Home Office because it cannot be digitally checked. And understandably, they fear that one document, the most important document they possess, they fear it being lost or being unavailable for them in order to continue accessing employment or accessing support. So these problems, combined with the pandemic-induced disruption to all our work, has led to many calling out to the Home Office to request for this grace period, this first 6 months, to be extended beyond the 30th of June 2021. However, the Home Office, when laying the regulations I introduced a bit earlier, stated in their publications that the position remains that the deadline will be the 30th of June 2021, and that remains unchanged. So we're still faced with the first 6 months next year. We're still faced with the 30th of June 2021 deadline, unless things significantly change before that time. So for those who have not received an EU SS status, they will need to understand what their lawful residence will be from January and June next year. And so to do that, they need to look at these regulations. So let's look at the regulations. The regulations tell us that for EU citizens who are lawfully resident in the UK by virtue of free movement law, immediately before the end of the transition period, and who do not have a status under the EU settlement scheme, then this regulations saves their existing residence in the UK. What does that mean in essence? Well, if someone is exercising their treaty rights in the UK at 11 PM on the 31st of December 2020, that status will be frozen in time until such time they make a settlement scheme application and until such time they get a status under the scheme. So what's exercising treaty rights? Well, we know that's either working, being self-employed, being self-sufficient with comprehensive sickness health insurance coverage, being a student with comprehensive sickness health insurance coverage, or any combination of those at any one time. So if someone's doing one of those activities or multiple activities at the end of the transition period, they're lawfully resident in the UK. But what about people who are not, or who come from difficult groups and difficult backgrounds like the Roma? This essentially means that not all EU citizens will have the lawful right of residence in the first 6 months of next year. There are more obvious ones which have come to the news when these regulations were laid, that includes students without health insurance coverage, that includes self-sufficient people without health insurance coverage. But let's talk about those who are not exercising treaty rights because their work may not be considered genuine and effective. So they're not doing enough hours of work per week, or their work is sporadic in nature, or there may be others that are working significant hours or multiple jobs, but they don't possess the necessary evidence of that work because of the type of employer they're engaging with, or because their employers are not being forthright with HMRC about their PAYE obligations. So there's no record of that person ever being employed in the first place. And we're facing many examples of that within these groups. This means for these people that during the grace period, their residence in the UK will be unlawful because they cannot be said that or cannot prove that they're lawfully resident in the UK before the end of the transition period. It's likely, and the news from the Home Office is that the Home Office will likely tolerate their presence in the first 6 months of next year. So while they'll be in law unlawfully resident, the Home Office may not actually do anything about it until July next year. So this so-called tolerance will kind of solve the problem a little bit. The trouble is, there are more complications arising in this. During the grace period, and even now, we're receiving reports of increasing, although unlawful activities in checking rights and entitlements of people being in the UK. So remember, up until July next year, an EU citizen to work, to be self-employed, to do what they want to do, only needs to present their national ID card or their passport or proof that they're a family member of an EU citizen to exercise their rights in the UK. No one should have to be forced to or be requested to provide their EU SS status. However, we're receiving lots of reports of this occurring now. Employers are asking to see it. Third parties are asking to see it. Some of them wrongly, some of them because they just don't understand how this all works. If someone is considered unlawfully resident in the first 6 months of next year, and these checks are being unfairly placed on them, this may prevent significant obstacles for them to continue exercising their rights. And we know that the Roma have significant difficulties accessing their rights at the best of times. And worryingly, even more so, the problem does not go away by making an application to the EU settlement scheme. This is because a person will be considered unlawfully resident until such time they're granted a status under the EU settlement scheme. So if, as we expect, more and more Roma and more vulnerable persons apply closer and closer to the deadline, their applications are unlikely to be processed until sometime after the deadline. So from the first, if their residents in the first 6 months of next year are tolerated, their residents beyond the 30th of June next year, will not be tolerated, because on the 1st of July, employers and third parties are going to be asking them what their status is, what's their lawful status. And if they say, I've made an application to the EU settlement scheme, that will not be enough to protect their lawful residents in the UK, because they never had it in the first place. So they'll only be able to confirm their lawful residence until their application is processed. And if they apply close before the deadline, their application is going to be considered long after the deadline. And for persons like the Roma and who are vulnerable, their applications take significantly longer to be processed. So it could be much more than 6 months before they get a status under the scheme. And so we just don't know what the government's response is to this question. If someone's unlawfully resident on the 30th of June and they can remain unlawfully resident from the 1st of July, how are they continue to protect their rights and entitlements from that point onwards? This question has already been put to the government when the regulations were laid, and their response has been inadequate to date. Their response is that it was never in their intention to do anything about those unlawfully resident in the UK beyond what is required in the EU-UK withdrawal agreement and in EU law. So their response is essentially saying, well, if someone's unlawfully resident in the UK, well, there's not much we could do about that. It was on their backs. They should have ensured that they were lawfully resident here. It's not our job to provide them with that coverage. And so they'll need to apply to the EU settlement scheme. So in essence, this really does mean that we don't have until the 30th of June 2021 to help the Roma and every vulnerable person to make applications to the scheme. The deadline is in essence today. We need to make these applications as quickly as possible, because the quicker we make these applications, the more likely they'll get a pre-settled or settled status before the 1st of July next year. And if they do so, then their lawful residence is protected beyond that date. But we all know, because many of us on this call work with vulnerable groups of EU citizens, that we continue to face obstacles in trying to help them. I mean, even from our services, we've had cancellations of face-to-face events and support, understandably, because of what's happening around us. We've had to adapt or disrupt services, and where we've adapted to them, they've moved online, which, as we know, presents significant obstacles for people we try to help. As well as that, wider advice organisations are facing obstacles themselves. There's delays on getting DBS checks. So if you want to become an advisor to vulnerable groups or children, you need to get a DBS check. There's delays on having those processed. If you want to become an accredited advisor, you need to become OIC regulated. That's not a speedy process either at the moment. As well as the closures or interruptions in the Home Office's services during this time. And in addition to general lack of space in the news about these issues, it's all about the EU-UK trade deal and no deal, and not a lot else about this and this topic, despite the Home Office's assurances that their comms is up to scratch and they're reaching and they intend to reach everyone with it. And since I last talked, quite a long time ago in one of these past meetings, the same issues we reported on remain prevalent. There remains a lack of or no access to a valid ID to make an application under the EU settlement scheme. There remains a lack of and no access to documents to prove residence in order to get the right status under the scheme. And those two issues, again, impact on whether they're lawfully resident in the UK for the first 6 months of next year and potentially beyond as well. There remains obstacles with limited language skills, limited IT skills, lack of access to the internet and relevant devices, limited access to information. There remains, and I'm continue to be surprised, although I shouldn't continue to be surprised, that there remains many people who I speak to now that still don't understand what the end of the transition period means for them. They don't understand they need to make this EU settlement scheme application. They don't even know that there's an EU settlement scheme application. So there still continues to be significant obstacles and significant reasons why a deadline should, while a deadline is useful for people to motivate them to make an application, there needs to be some lawful way of protecting one's residence beyond the deadline until such time they make an EU settlement scheme application. And finally, there just seems to be a big misconception and misunderstanding of what no deal means in the news now. We hear a lot about the deal or a no deal, and there seems to continue to be a lack of misunderstanding that this is about trade. The EU protections have been agreed a long time ago. And the effort then to the news of no deal continues to be a significant obstacle for people making an application to the scheme because they don't understand that this is not about rights and residence rights. This is about trade. But despite those obstacles, we need to continue our relentless efforts to reach everyone we can because it's still our job to try and reduce the number of people who miss the deadline and the number of people who become unlawfully resident beyond that date. We're not going to reach everyone, but our job is to reduce that number as much as possible so we have capacity to help those who do miss the deadline after that point. So the sooner we get people to apply, the sooner we help people to apply before the 30th of June 2021, the more likely that we'll have them through the scheme and their residents lawfully protected from the 1st of July 2021. Thank you very much. I'm not sure how much over the time I've
You're
run, so
absolutely fine, Chris, because we did start slightly later. So thank you so much indeed. You've raised some...
Martin, I've got to go, but thank you so much.
Rosie, I just saw you were there, so just to say thank you so much to the Deputy Speaker for actually taking time to join us. So thank you very much, Rosie, indeed.
It might be good if I could sort of chat, because I've got to go to the conference, but chatting to you at some point would be great.
It would indeed. Drop your line. Thank you, Rosie, for being here. Thank you. Bye-bye. I think it shows the importance that so many members give to the issue of which the challenges that the Roma community are facing. We have the Deputy Speaker joining us. We've got other members, Afzal Khan, we get Baroness Ruth Lister from the House of Lords, my friends Stuart MacDonald, Tommy Shepherd. I know that Stephen Timms is on the line as well, and I think other members are joining us. And I think, Chris, you know, you're highlighting and ranging the profound challenges that the community is facing around regulation. Also the issue about no deal implications, about rights and the profound implications for the community. And as we must continue to work to make sure that we go beyond the deadline to work on behalf of the Roma community. Again, because of time, I'm now going to hand over to Helen Stalford as a Professor of Law at the University of Liverpool and Founding Director of the European Children's Rights Unit. Has also researched and published extensively on children's rights, particularly in the context of immigration law, EU law, and has co-founded the Brexit and Children Coalition with the Children's Society, Quorum, and the Children's Rights Alliance for England, and was appointed to the Home Office in 2018 to develop its child-focused communication strategy relating to the European Union Settled Status Scheme. Helen, we're grateful you've been able to join us, and if I'd like to hand over to you at the moment.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me. I guess I'm here as a bit of an interloper. I'm no expert in the Roma community, but it's something that I've developed an interest in as part of our Brexit and children's research and campaigning. So as the introduction indicated, we've been working for a number of years. I myself have been researching children's rights under EU law for about over 20 years now. But shortly after the referendum, we developed this a coalition of about 30 different experts and civil society organisations to really shine a light on the impact of Brexit on a completely invisible group as far as the Brexit negotiations were concerned, and that's children. And we produced a pretty comprehensive report in 2017 on making Brexit work for children. And we highlighted in that report a number of different areas in which the EU had added real value and protection to children's status across various areas of activity, and the potential losses of Brexit to children. In addition, then, that work has developed into very specific EU settlement scheme focused work, and we analysed the conditions for EU settlement, and on the back of that were appointed by the Home Office to develop its child-friendly communications strategy. And the rationale for developing a communication strategy specifically for children was that the EU settlement scheme is very much premised on this notion that parents will register their children, that parents have the skills and the information and the resources that they need and the awareness that they need to do that for their children. But there is, as Chris has already said, huge lack of information or misinformation or complete ignorance around the obligations relating to registering children. We know that there is just under 1 million known EU children who require registration under the EU settlement scheme, and the last analysis of the statistics revealed that there are significantly less children being registered for EU settlement than adults. So about 97% of adults who we think need to be registered are registered for the scheme, but only about less than 60% of children actually have been registered for the scheme. So we started this piece of work with the Home Office following some really constructive conversations with them about particular children who were very vulnerable to falling through the gaps. So we identified children in the Roma community, children looked after children, so children in care, children outside of mainstream education, and disabled children. And we also identified children in the criminal justice system. The reason for that is that criminal justice statistics reveal ethnicity, but they don't reveal nationality. And so we had no way of knowing how many children in the criminal justice system would fall foul of the registration criteria, which operates on a kind of suitability test as well as a residence test. So we produced a report around the particular issues facing children in conflict with the law, and then we started to do this quite in-depth consultation with children around the kinds of information that they had about the EU settlement, the readiness of their parents to register them. That was quite a significant piece of work. We started in June 2019, and the work is still ongoing. In the first phase of the consultation, we consulted with 54 young people across different parts of England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales through different organisations that were working directly with them to get a sense of what a child-focused communication strategy should look like. And that sample just happened to include a really high proportion of Roma children. Lots of Roma children were coming forward wanting to talk about this. Lots of Roma children became known to these organisations that were working on EU settlement issues. And as part of that, then we started to really try and visualise what a child-focused communication strategy should look like. But that revealed real vulnerabilities of the Roma community over and above any of the other communities of children that we were looking at. So why focus on Roma children in particular? Well, apart from the fact that the EU settlement scheme efforts have been almost entirely adult focused, any attempts by the government or even civil society organisations, and rightly so, in relation to children have almost exclusively focused on looked after children. That was quite a successful part of the campaign, in a way that organisations like Quorum and the Children's Society had done great work to focus efforts on the 9,000 or 10,000 estimated EU children living in care who didn't have a parent necessarily to register them, and whose social worker might not know how to register them. So quite detailed guidance was produced, and the Children's Society have done further work to really expose local authorities that have really failed to kind of engage with EU settlements. So that's one group. But the Roma community are potentially even more vulnerable, because they're not even in contact with those services to enable them to be registered. They are less known to services and support generally, much more marginalised. The EU settlement scheme registrations data is disaggregated according to nationality and not ethnicity. So that doesn't reveal how many Roma children are falling through the gaps. We know that their parents' language and literacy skills and their access to the online facilities required are much poorer than other groups of children. And so the rationale for our work was really that we need to target communications to children directly. It is actually children in lots of immigration scenarios that are navigating complex immigration and nationality processes for their parents, not the other way around. So by empowering and informing children, you're empowering and informing parents and communities. The other thing is that we know from the criminal justice statistics that people from the Roma community are disproportionately represented in prisons, and they would potentially then fall foul of the suitability criteria of the EU settlement scheme, leaving their children also vulnerable. Youth justice statistics also tell us that Roma children are disproportionately represented in youth justice in criminal convictions. The other thing is that we know that they just have less access to the legal advice and representation that is needed. So even though the Home Office has supported about 57 different organisations to give frontline advice to different communities who are vulnerable to falling through the registration gaps, they are they don't necessarily have the regulatory approval and experience to deal with the more complex cases that often confront the Roma community. Many of those, as the Roma Support Group have revealed, have maybe sought asylum prior to them falling within the free movement provisions, because they would have sought asylum prior to their countries joining the EU in either 2004 or 2007. So would have had indefinite leave to remain, and then would have fallen within the free movement provisions afterwards. Complex cases, uncertainty around how they shift within these different immigration statuses, particularly for children born subsequent to that immigration status. The other thing that's very distinctive about the Roma community is that the EU had put in place very specific and quite extensive support to target the discrimination of the Roma community from across the EU. So all of our anti-discrimination laws support Roma integration. EU structural funds have provided millions to support Roma integration services in the UK. And those structural funds obviously are no longer going to be continued. We have information about a shared prosperity fund, but further details of that seem to have disappeared into the ether, meaning that many of those vital kind of resources to support Roma integration and support they really will fall off a cliff edge. And the other thing that our research revealed is that young people from the Roma community have experienced a significant amount of racist abuse since the Brexit referendum. Lots of the young people we spoke to talked about children in their schools telling them to go back, that they had to go back home. So our focused EUSS communication strategy was not just about informing Roma children and other children from the EU about their rights and obligations under the settlement scheme, but about informing children more generally about their rights to stay here. Just a little bit of a touch of the data. In our consultation with all of the children, they had virtually no understanding of their immigration status, of Brexit, the impact of Brexit on their immigration status. They had quite a strong sense of their rights as a community living here, but no idea of how those rights linked, or how sort of vulnerable those rights were to being sort of undermined through a sort of poorer immigration status. Most had never even heard of the EU settlement scheme. Of the 33 Roma children in our study, not a single one had actually applied for the EU settlement scheme. Most of it, I think virtually all of them were saying that that their parents just didn't know about the EU settlement scheme, would know significantly less than them, would have very limited capacity to sort of work through the registration process. And just finally then, I think the other thing that has really, that the research and the consultation has really shone a light on is Roma children's enhanced eligibility for British citizenship. So under our nationality laws, children have kind of enhanced rights, facilitated access to British citizenship as long as they are children. And there are different routes into British citizenship, and many of you here have, and I know Baroness Lister has been particularly active on this. So they have these different routes. Some of them are eligible for British citizenship because they've been living here for so long as children. Some of them are British citizens by rights because their parents were settled in the UK and they were born to those settled parents after that. So they are British citizens by right. Now, we started to really talk to the young people about their sort of histories, and our work on EU family migration since the 1990s tells us that about 35% of the majority of migrants who migrate to the UK under the free movement provisions are under 35. And most of those then have families, either young families or families after arriving in the host state. And many of them, because of their children, then settle in the host state for significant periods of time. So many of those children are at least eligible for British citizenship. Now, if we look at the Roma community and their history of Roma migration from other EU countries, we know that the bulk of that has happened in the 2004 and 2007 waves of enlargement. In 2004, when 8 additional EU countries joined the EU with large Roma communities, that stimulated a significant rise in Roma migration to the UK, largely because the UK was one of only 3 countries not to impose restrictions on free movement following that first wave of enlargement. So we saw a significant amount, I think about 70% of those migrants came to the UK in that first wave of migration, and a significant proportion of those were Roma. Now, Roma EU migration is slightly different to normal EU free movement motivations. So the majority of EU free movements would have been moving for work or study or retirement. The Roma community are often moving for a better quality of life, to escape abject discrimination in other European countries that have very high rates of discrimination, anti-Roma attitudes and laws. So you can see how the Roma motivations to settle in the UK were greater than other EU communities. So a higher proportion, what we can sort of distill from that is that a higher proportion of those children born to those families have been here for perhaps 16 years. They are British citizens of right and have no idea of that. Now, because of the deadlines that Chris has talked about relating to EU registration, many of those are, when we started to ask them about, well, if you think you might be British citizens, why would you apply for EU settlement? Do you think you need to do both, or what's your understanding of that? Most of them said, well, we would definitely apply for EU settlement because it's free, and British citizenship might be over £1,000 for us. So fees is an issue, but that is based on a kind of misunderstanding or only a partial understanding of the British citizenship rules and the fact that some of them could qualify for British citizenship for free. So that it's not just about money, and it's as much about information and awareness as to which route they need to go down to secure their British citizenship entitlement. And there's British citizenship may be a bit of a double-edged sword for them. First of all, because they may have to relinquish their own EU nationality in order to qualify for British citizenship if their own EU nationality doesn't allow for dual nationality. So that's something that they need to be aware of and take advice on, because they don't want to relinquish all of their free movement rights just in order to secure British citizenship. But secondly, it seems that many of them just don't realise that this is time sensitive, that once they reach 18, they're no longer going to fall within the concessionary criteria for British citizenship. So this is a real time-sensitive issue. They need access to information and more complex nationality advice and support to enable them to navigate these different routes and make an informed choice. That kind of information and support simply isn't available. It's much more complex. The sort of niche organisations that are providing that support are enormously oversubscribed. We know that with the fees issue, there's ongoing strategic litigation around that point, but it's still costing over £1,000 for those who have to pay the fees. So there's just a taster of some of the issues that have come out of our study. We've produced these reports, which you can, I'll send a link around the chat, which you can plug into, which you provide quite a lot more information about citizenship and about Roma children's specific status under the scheme. Thank you.
Helen, thank you so much. I think one of the main things that you mentioned about intervention, especially early intervention, is that it has a proven track record of improving outcomes for children and young people. And in relation to this, I think it'd be clear it would also have a proven record of informing the wider community as if children are more aware of the issues that they themselves will face up until the age of 18. And I think that's an issue that we all really need to be aware of. I maybe just had one question before I bring Mihai Bica into the conversation. I'm just wondering, maybe Helen, around the Home Office's notoriously reluctant to issue paper applications for clients who don't have valid IDs. Is there any way of getting a bit more understanding and flexibility, maybe from yourself, and maybe Chris, if you would like to maybe say something on that, but to Helen, to you first.
Yeah, I know that Mihai will probably have something to say about this as well. At the moment, when we talk to them about this, they are extremely resistant to providing any paper form. But I know that there was a meeting quite recently about that probably Mihai and Ilse could update you on, and others on the call. I just wanted to say as well, Martin, that it's really important, aside from the sort of vulnerabilities of children, if children secure their residence rights through these different routes, then it anchors their parents' rights of residence. So it kind of helps to offset some of the issues that Chris was referring to. So if children are settled in education here as lawful citizens, then they have their parents, their primary carers have a right to stay here as well. They don't necessarily have access to welfare benefits, but at least they have a right of residence. So it's really, and there is also a statutory duty under Section 55 of our Border Citizenship and Immigration Act to attend to the welfare of children in any immigration decision-making and nationality law decision-making. So that Section 55 duty has had really important traction in the courts as well. So if we could secure children's residence status and nationality status, it's a really important way of addressing their parents' residence status.
Thank you. Chris, I was going to ask you to come in there, but I know that Baroness Ruth Lister's also got a question, but I'm keen to move on to Mihai as well. So I'm just wondering, Ruth, if you want to ask your question just now.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for Helen and for already been said. Two things. One is just to note that Baroness Williams, the Minister in the Home Office, in the Lords, Home Office Minister in the Lords, is trying to get together a group of peers to talk about, and it came out of the amendments some of us had on the question of citizenship, to talk about belonging and citizenship. So if you can point me to what in your research might be relevant to that, that would be really helpful. But I may have misunderstood you. I heard you say, I think, that when young people and children and their parents are weighing up the balance of applying the EUSS or for citizenship, where there is a right to register that citizenship. I think you said that they wouldn't necessarily have to pay the fee, and I wasn't quite sure what you meant by that, in what circumstances, because my understanding was that they would have to pay the fee, and that is a real barrier.
Yeah, I agree that there is a huge barrier for most children who are eligible to apply, but some children are British citizens as of right if their parents have lived here for a significant period of time before they were even born here. So they might have been born after their parents arrived, settled, and therefore they would be British citizens of right and wouldn't have to pay the fees. So in the citizenship report that that I'll give you a link to, I know you've seen it, Ruth, we provide the different routes to citizenship, who would have to apply, pay the fees and who wouldn't. So a significant proportion, we think, although it's so difficult to tell, wouldn't even have to pay the fees. But they would need support to apply, obviously.
So thank you so much for that. I'm very keen to move on, and I know there's some other folks who want to raise some issues, but I need to bear with me because I'm very keen that Mihai Bica comes into the conversation. Mihai, thank you so much for joining as a community representative and campaign worker at Roma Support Group, and being very important in setting up today's event, and also working with other members of the community who will be speaking later. Giving the lived experience, which is critical to our understanding. So Mihai, over to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for joining this event today. First of all, I would like to say thank you to the APPG for Gypsy Roma Travelers for supporting us with organizing this event, and to everyone here today for making time to join us. I'm working for the Roma Support Group, coordinating the Roma Brexit campaigning and policy project, which enabled us to have this event today. This project builds on the experience we gained through the policy and campaigning work that Roma Support Group has been doing in the past years around Brexit. Ever since the Brexit referendum took place, people from our communities realized that this will have a terrible impact on them, their families, and their lives. Back in 2018, we've heard from Roma people, some of them here today as well, that those from our communities have made UK their home and they're happy they've made this decision. A majority of us are able to navigate the labor market and get jobs and provide for our families. How much we can provide and how good those jobs are, it's a different matter. But we don't complain too much. For vast majority of us, things are better because they really are. And in most cases, we only have much worse to compare to. Our children are going to school because that's the number one reason we have made UK our home. We want a better future for them. We still have to do a lot of work on this, and there is much more to say about this as well, but not today. And the Brexit is a real threat to all our dreams and hopes for a better future. That's why, as soon as we started talking about Brexit, we worked as much as possible to ensure that all those involved in the process are aware of our communities and will not leave us behind. We also have mobilized people from our communities around this as well. Why we have done that? Because we wanted to ensure that support is available and accessible to those from our communities, the same like any other community vulnerable in this context. All over the EU, including in the UK, the Roma communities have the poorest outcome in education. For example, by 2014, a research by Fundamental Rights Agency identified that 20% of adult Roma population self-declared as not being able to read and write, compared to 1% of the non-Roma population. This means that navigating an online process such as the EU settlement scheme is much more problematic for us comparing to those from other communities. In fact, based on our analysis from late 2018, we've seen that only 3% of Roma were able to complete and submit the EUSS application completely independent. We've also seen that 30 to 40% of us are requested to submit further evidence when making the application, which makes things much more difficult for us, especially for the Roma women. Many of them have longer periods of staying at home with children, comparing to women from other communities. This meant that we needed support to navigate through the whole process, from accessing information to submitting applications. Now, since the EUSS was launched in March 2019, we, Roma Support Group, have looked closely at how things are progressing overall, and more specifically in the case of Roma. We have met, discussed, and worked with more than 30 organizations, including local authorities and schools. We have also engaged directly with more than 2,500 people from our communities. And we have collected all that information and learning through a report which we produced and released in June this year, which is available on Roma Support Group website. We have learned that the EUSS can work for the Roma communities as long as appropriate support is in place. We know that as of 2013, there are at least 200,000 Roma living in the UK. Based on our analysis, we believe that support created through the Home Office funding did not reach more than 50,000 people from our communities. As already mentioned, we have engaged with 30 organizations providing some sort of EUSS support to Roma. And 6 of these organizations, including us, have worked with about 7,000 Roma by March 2020. We have seen that the most important concerns are around the valid ID documents, which was already mentioned. From our observation, 10 to 15% of Roma do not have a valid ID document, and getting a new one seems to be very difficult. And it was so before the pandemic as well, and now the situation is getting worse. We've also seen that 15 to 25% of Roma children are not making applications, either because they lack ID documents or because their parents are not aware that children have to make applications as well. We've seen that vast majority of those sleeping rough are not making applications either, because it's much more difficult for them to get the support they need, and also because they're very concerned of sending their ID documents to the Home Office. We've seen that in the case of Roma, vast majority of those sleeping rough have national identity documents which have to be sent to the Home Office. We've also seen that Roma are more likely to get pre-settled status rather than settled status. In the case of Roma, 62% of them are getting pre-settled status, while the national average is 42%. And on top of that, we have already seen that Roma have huge problems around accessing and using their digital status. Vast majority of Roma are not even aware of the existence of the digital status. And the COVID-19 pandemic added more complexity to this situation. The waiting times for the appointments with the embassies in order to obtain a new ID document has increased considerably. And this affects, in many cases, the children who need to make applications to get ID documents. We've also seen that access to face-to-face support has decreased considerably, dramatically, especially because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have also seen how the use of digital status is already making problems for those from the Roma communities, and not only. Many of those from our communities had huge problems accessing universal credit and using, because they were required to use their EUSS digital status in order to complete their applications for universal credit. And unfortunately, many have went through to very difficult situations because they did not have their applications accepted. Now, what needs to be done? We have to see the work to provide EUSS support improving, and we have to see that work increasing considerably. So far, we've seen that the organizations that have engaged and worked with the Roma before the EUSS started were very efficient in providing this support. This was possible because they have worked a lot to build the trust and relations with the Roma people in their areas. They have also learned how to work efficiently and ensure the right support is in place. For these reasons, they made sure that support is available in languages that the community speak, and wherever possible, Roma advocates were in place, were employed to ensure good engagement, both professionally, but also culturally. This cultural aspect is very important when engaging with those Roma communities, because it ensures that people are understood. It ensures that there is a good communication with them, and they understand what information is being delivered to them, and this increases considerably their engagement with that service, and therefore also their understanding that they have to make applications and go through that process. Well, more than that, we need to see more work from the local authorities, especially those who have large Roma population in their areas. They need to ensure that information and support is accessible for all EU citizens in their areas, in accessible languages and through trusted channels. They should also engage with the charities in their areas and ensure that they have resources needed to meet the EUSS demands that they are seeing from their clients. We have seen through our work many Roma groups and other groups working with Roma seeing huge demands from their Roma clients, asking for EUSS support and facing huge problems because they were not able to meet that huge demand, and they did not have resources and tools in place to provide this support. And many have reported that communication and engagement with the local authority in that area is problematic. But we've also seen good cases. We've also seen cases of local authorities working well with the local groups and also with the Roma communities. And then you'll hear an example of that soon. We also need to see more work done by schools. we have seen that there is a huge gap in information and support provided by schools. In the case of Roma, many times children are the ones supporting adults accessing information by interpreting or translating for them. We have engaged with over 400 schools in London only, and only 6 responded, only 2 of them agreed to have EOSS sessions with their EU citizens, including the Roma. We are still engaging with schools, and each time we work with them, we hear from their staff that they were not aware of the EOSS or some details of it. We see though that schools that are employing East European staff, and especially Roma staff, are more aware of the EOSS process and are better informed about it, and also more willing to organize sessions and to make sure that support is in place. So we try as much as possible to make the schools aware of these requirements, and to raise the concern that they should do more work to ensure that their EU families, including the Roma families, are informed of the process and of the requirement. More than that, we have also seen in schools where their EU families have already made applications. We have seen that there is a lot of misinformation around people who already made application. Misinformation around if children should apply or not, around how to access and use their immigration status, and how to update their pre-settled status to settled status. So there is still a lot of work that needs to be done, and also that could be done through schools, even with those who have already made applications. We also need to see that the organizations funded by the Home Office to provide EOSS support, we want to see them planning better their engagement with the Roma communities. That should include working more with people from the Roma communities and resourcing their time. We have seen throughout this process, ever since we started talking about Brexit, we have seen a huge interest from various organizations from across the country to work and support the Roma, and we welcome that very much. And many have done important work and very good work to support the Roma communities. But many, we have, at the same time, we've seen that many have not planned that as good as expected. And given that there is still some time to do that, and based on the learning we had so far, we advise that they should seek where are the trusted members from the communities, who is working with the Roma in the areas they want to work with in, and try to engage with those people, with those groups, with those charities, and resource them for their time and efforts, because we have seen organizations reaching out to Roma groups or to Roma individuals, trying to work with them and provide support to Roma people in their areas. And this added a lot of pressure on their time, on their resources and their efforts. I'm talking here about the Roma groups and Roma advocates. So any sort of resource and any sort of, there definitely needs a better planning in place. We've seen now with the second round of Home Office funding that quite a few of the local authorities have received funding, and this is why we appeal to them to use this funding, and to ensure that all those digitally excluded, all those having problems accessing information in English, all of them get support and information in accessible language and through channels they trust. And in sort of best scenario, those local authorities should work with the charities who are trusted by the communities in ensuring that an efficient support is in place. And we need to see more flexibility from the Home Office around supporting those with complex cases. Roma advocates from across the country are reporting that it is a difficult process of getting the Home Office to issue a paper application. And they are also reporting that these requests are increasing in the last period. And we can't move too far from the issue of digital status. Not only Roma would benefit greatly from having a physical evidence. Decision makers should still consider this option, or at least ensure that support will be available to everyone who will face problems because of this. And all the stakeholders involved in this process should think not only about supporting people to make USS applications, but should also think and plan work towards helping people to update their status from pre-settled status to settled status, should also plan work towards helping those facing difficulties with accessing their digital status and using it, because we see that there will be huge problems coming up soon because of this. I think this is pretty much what I want to pass as a message to everyone here today. And I'm sure the other speakers have went through more details around specific issues regarding those from Roma communities, and you will hear more from other of my colleagues and friends from the Roma communities soon. If you have any other questions, I'll be more than welcome to take them and respond.
Thank you so much, Mihai. And I think as some of the profound challenges the community faces and others, I think is in terms of the digital exclusion stroke agenda. And I know that there may be some answers to that during the Q&A, but as someone who is very much interested in digitalisation, I have to say that the most effective digital states are those which also retain and support traditional methods of engagement. And I'm also very lucky to be the co-chair of the All Party Group on Estonia. In the Estonian state, if you don't get access digitally, you just access it in the traditional method. And there's a lot of learning to be done there. I'm very much aware that we're up against time, and I'm very keen now to move on to Colin Havard, who's the Community Development Coordinator at Sheffield City Council, and has been working on community development for new arrivals in Sheffield, including from the Roma Slovak community. Colin was part of the National Roma Network Steering Group and is the lead on the European Union Settled Status Support for Sheffield City Council. Without further ado, Colin, over to you.
Thank you. I always feel a bit embarrassed following Mihai, really, because let's face it, he's the real deal. In Sheffield, we have around 6,000 Roma, mainly from Slovakia, and mainly from the more rural areas. So we've been trying to support this community who gather in two main parts of the city for some time. And the EU settlement scheme actually initially offered us an opportunity because we'd come to realise that transactional relationships worked best. If we had something to offer, then we were more likely to get something back. And so we were hoping that the EU settlement scheme and providing support that way would offer us a transactional relationship. It didn't work. But we have seen over 1,000 people, 500 of whom are known to have registered. We don't really know exactly how many have registered because often follow-up work is quite hard work. And so getting them to answer us about, well, did you get status or not? It can be quite hard. We did follow Mihai's advice, and we have used trusted organisations in our communities, partly because they have much better skills than we have, and partly because this is just one aspect of developing trust and capacity in those communities. And so those organisations are going to be also supporting people with other elements around housing or employment or whatever else. And so developing relationships with the City Council directly wasn't necessarily the most important thing to us. What we've found is that finding staff with the right skills, language skills, as well as advice skills, can be quite hard work. Keeping them is also quite hard work when the funding related is 6 months at a time, and comes in right at the last minute. And that is a big issue for us, has been. In terms of what the local authority themselves can do, obviously we can add value in terms of our ability to get to schools, care homes, etc. And we have begun to ramp up our advertising in this respect. However, we had to be careful because we didn't want to overwhelm. If we went too early and got too many people to seek support, we would just end up with a huge waiting list. And without any prior advertising of our support services, we've been running a 3-4 week waiting list for the last year, purely done on word of mouth. So there is an issue for us that we are now targeting a group that we don't really know who's there. It's like doing a treasure hunt without knowing whether there's actually any treasure out there or how many pieces there are, because it's a guess how many Roma people or EU citizens are in our city. And that guesstimate is hard to follow. For example, we know that according to the Home Office statistics, Leeds has already registered over 110% of its EU citizens, and we're supposedly somewhere in the 80%, but we don't know. And so sometimes that can make things a bit harder work. I think that the day-to-day issues that we're seeing are around digital access. People don't have the skills or the equipment sometimes to get that. Very concerned about what's going to happen when people are expected to use digital methods to prove their status. I'm not too sure how that's going to work, because we know that people we've supported who we then say, well, you need to log into your email to see what happened to your account, often just can't do it. And they come back to us going, well, can you log in to it? And well, sometimes I think one of our issues has been that COVID hasn't helped us, because prior to that we would have held, we did have drop-in surgeries where a whole family could turn up. This might go on for some time as members of the family ran back and forth to the house to get different bits of documentation, often leaving the good bit of documentation at home. And we can't do that at the moment. And doing it via the telephone, which is what we've been doing, has proven really hard work. So we're now doing a little hybrid version where people can come in for some socially distanced ID verification, then go home again and get a phone call to follow on, carry on the registration. So you don't need to hear lots more practical stuff from us, but what I would say is that we're very concerned about how many people are not going to go through this process, for all the reasons that Chris, Helen and Mihai have highlighted. What we as a local authority can do about that after the fact, what the rules will be about how we can support people as a local authority, because my fear is that actually we're going to end up begging our voluntary sector partners to do it because we're not allowed to. And that would be problematic, because then we're just pushing the pressure onto the under-resourced. I'm not saying local authorities are well-resourced, but we're certainly larger. And so I think that we need clearer guidance earlier about what will happen come July with those people who haven't been able to register, as well as we definitely need a non-digital means of proving your ID. The idea that your average landlord is going to understand this system, let alone your average employer, even if the Roma person themselves can understand it, it's a recipe for disaster for me. I'll stop there so that we've got a chance for some questions.
Colin, thank you so much. And I think having formerly been a local government councillor, I'll know the challenges that officers at local government level will be facing in a range of issues, critically around issues such as this, and the concerns, first of all, about the numbers coming forward, and also the economic implications, not just of COVID-19, but Brexit on your ability to support the most vulnerable. So very keenly aware of that, as I'm sure many people across these islands will be. And again, yes, I'm very aware of time, and maybe just to follow up on one point before I bring community members in and then go to a quick Q&A, because we are up against the clock here. I know that Julian Mahoney from the Home Office, very grateful Julian's on the line and been able to join us. And Julian, I don't know if you're still there, and if you wanted to say a few words around the issue of the paper issue, if you're still there at all, that'd be great.
I am. Good morning, Chair. Just checking you can hear me okay.
I can indeed, yes. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to come today, and thank you for all of those people who've spoken, and I've taken a great deal of notes, as has a colleague, James, who from our Stratcoms unit, who's also on the call as well. I'm not going to try and cover off most of the things that have been said. We are directly linked into quite a number of organisations represented here today. From the EUSS Vulnerability Programme, the work we do covers a huge raft of these elements. We have done a huge amount of work across all of the issues of vulnerability, including the work around Roma community over the last 18-24 months. In terms of a couple of really quick things, if it's okay, Chair, the reference to the 57 organisations, we now have 72 grant-funded organisations working with the Home Office. Of those 72, at least 53 specifically offer support for the Roma community, and that was as part of their grant agreement. I will make sure off the back of this meeting I send various links, etc., so those can be shared. In relation to the question around paper applications, one of the key things that I do as part of my day job, as the work I do as part of my team, is to say to people, tell me what the barriers are. Tell me what the issues you as individual organisations are having. If there's an issue, and Christopher, I've dropped you an email separately, the issue around OISC registration. If there are organisations struggling to get OISC registration, please drop me an email. I'm quite happy. It's julian.mahoney@homeoffice.gov.uk. I'm genuinely happy, and I receive lots of emails from organisations. I will pick up these issues and I will drag them out, and I will aim to fix them. With OISC, we have worked with OISC to make sure there is capacity. So if there is an issue, if there's a block, let me know and I will take that on and I will fix it. In relation to paper forms, in relation to that process, we have a process in place. That's to manage and ensure that the correct triage and people are getting the correct advice, and the Settlement Resolution Centre, who are a fantastic team, manage that process. But I'm acutely aware that there are organisations who may struggle. There may be an issue. If that is the case, please come on to me. It's only through us raising issues with the SRC and through identifying these learnings that we can improve this process for everybody. If we can fix the issue for one organisation, it fixes it for other people as well. And if there's more that we can do to support individual organisations directly through taking forward individual cases, and I'm quite happy to receive emails, and I do regularly, and I've had half a dozen while we've been on this meeting today, from organisations saying, would you mind having a look at this issue, would you mind having a look at this, and we will pick that up and we will work forward with it. There's lots of kind of other elements around further support we're doing with local authorities. There's a lot of work in train. There's a new round of communications going to be directed, coming out in the coming, I think, next month or so. But again, there's a huge opportunity to do so much more with organisations. And if organisations want to work with us, organisations want something to help break down some of these barriers and identify and get through this, whether that is physically us turning up to address the ID issue, to help and actually do applications, do the ID element on site. That's something we've done in specific circumstances where we've got Home Office caseworkers with laptops and phones to come and do that element. It's slightly harder because of COVID, but again, those are things that we can do. If people are nervous about sending their documentation, we return those documents within 48 hours. That's how long they spend within our building. And I know that because I work in the same building as that team. So again, these are all of the things that we can do to support. I know there are kind of questions and comments, but Chair, I'm happy to people to email me directly and pick those up out of meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian, and I'm just very conscious of time, and I know that we can run over for a bit just to make sure that everyone has the ability to speak who's on the list, and I'm very grateful for Julian and his team for all the work they're doing, but I think it would be remiss as the co-chair of the All Party Parliamentary Group not to say that given the support that the staff at the Home Office are trying to provide, is that the complexity and the implications of Brexit for the Roma community and also for the Gypsy Traveller community in general cannot be underestimated. I think it is, that's me being very diplomatic, but also very grateful for the work that civil servants are trying their best to provide in very, very difficult circumstances. I'm not going to go into a Q&A at the moment. I do really wish to push on and make sure the community is able to fully voice some of the concerns that they have. And with that, I'm very grateful for Martina Stipkova, a Roma advocate from Rotherham, who is going to talk about the complex cases, especially about problems with ID documents. And I'm just wondering, Martina, if you're there. You are indeed. Can you just speak up again and just make sure we can hear you?
Hi, everybody.
We can hear you. That's great. So over to you, Martina.
So my name is Martina Stipkova from Clifton Learning Partnership in Rotherham. I have been working with Roma community for 5 years, and I have supported around 2,000 EU citizens with EU settlement scheme. Our biggest problem around EU settlement scheme is with the Slovakian embassy. So if you want to book an appointment to apply for passport, earlier date, we are now being given in end of April 2021. This is quite late, and we have to think of the children who were born in England, because when the parent has to apply for Slovak birth certificate, the waiting period is 3 months, and then after this, they have to apply for passport. This doesn't give people enough time to get things sorted. Parents are not aware that they must have their ID valid to be legally able to review their kid's passport or birth certificate as a legal guardians. So there is nothing we can do about it. We had a case where family contacted us because they needed help with the EU settlement scheme. We found out that family gave all their details to their landlord as an offer to help them. The landlord put his details on the application, such as email or phone number. The family don't know what the security questions are for the application, as the landlord didn't tell them. We tried to help them family, but fortunately, as they didn't know the email or phone number, it was not possible to us to help them. So family moved away in the meantime, so they have no contact with the landlord. So now we have to wait 6 months to pass. Then we are going to support family to apply again for EU settlement scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. And I'm going to head over now to Jura Tankos, a Roma advocate from Bradford, who will speak briefly about children and the European Union settled scheme.
Hi everyone, thank you for the opportunities. I am quite conscious of the time, so I will be trying my best to be very brief. And I think I don't want to repeat the same thing that already has been mentioned, but I just wanted to mention a few things about, especially our landlords, for example. In Bradford, most of the landlords are taking passport or ID cards from the families just to protect that. If you do pay the rent, I will give you the identity back. If you don't, I will keep it. And that was happening in Bradford, quite a large number of that. And there are also difficulties that families are facing with schools. Some schools are happy to support with providing paperwork, confirming that children have been in education for more than 5 years. But then unfortunately, some schools are not happy to do it. And then again, with the GP surgeries, most of them are charging between £30 and £50, which is really difficult for families to afford. So they're really trying their best, but they're really struggling. And as we had a discussion with, because we do have really good relationship with the families around Bradford, and as families highlighted, and personally I do agree with that as well, we as a Roma are finding it very difficult to feel we belong to. and we do have the opportunity to create better life for our children. And now Brexit and the EU settlement status is just put another pressure on top of everything of the discrimination. So it's very difficult for us. And most families who will have to return, they don't have homes. And that's very sad to see that children will be returning to nowhere. And I think that's just it from my side.
Thank you so much, Jura. And I'm very keen maybe try and get Alexandra Bohar, a Roma advocate from Liverpool, in as well, who'll share some good practice in Liverpool and speak about the impact of COVID-19. And I'm just conscious that we might get cut off. I'm hoping not at 11:30. So Alexandra, over to you.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Alexandra Bahor. I am Roma, and also I have the luck to work for a charity organization, Granby Toxted Development Trust, and to represent my Roma community from Liverpool. From the beginning of my role, like community worker, I understand the importance of partnership work between organization and local authorities. I want to highlight this because it is so important, the partnership work, because we are able to achieve everything that we want. In my place work, we don't have funding from Home Office to support the Roma families for the EU statement status, but this don't stop me to search other organizations and to make some drop-ins in our offices for several months until the pandemic started, and the Roma families to receive some advices and to be able to register for the settlement status. After this, the city council contact us and funding us to provide advice and workshops for the Roma families to know about their rights after Brexit. Another good partnership is with John Moores University, where we want to do a toolkit for employers and employees about the right to work after Brexit and how they can prove their status step by step to their employers, and also to deliver some background about the Roma, why they are here, why they come in UK, to create a good environment for both of them and to prevent the bullying at work for the Roma. We all know that this year was very difficult for all of us because of COVID-19. And I wanted to share a work that we do with the public health. I raised my concerns with them about the return of a big number of Roma families from holidays from the countries where they come from, and they needed to stay to self-isolated. That was mandatory, but they don't know this. And together with the public health, we contact schools and employers, and we ask to deliver letters for children and employers to self-isolate if they return in UK. Was a good proof that with this partnership work, the Roma communities were not a negative example, and do not have also community tensions in the city. Also, the numbers of the COVID-19 cases do not raise how unfortunately, where in other cities was a big number of members from Roma families lost their fight with this virus. We can see if we work together, it's more simple to achieve our aim. Now I have some concerns related with our new families that come first time this year in UK. We help them to register for the settlement status, but they don't feel, they still feel insecure because they don't have a national insurance number. And we know that right now with the national insurance number, it's not possible to do the application because of the pandemic problem. And they were advised by some good people to apply online and to pay £60. They pay this £60, but in the end, they don't receive anything. And in this situation where hundreds of Roma here in my city, and for sure is all happening in other cities the same in UK. We can see that they are vulnerable, and unfortunately, if they will not have the government, the parliament support or our support, they are an easy target for this kind of people. This is why I ask, and I hope that you will understand the importance to provide projects, communication with the Roma, and to continue this work after 2021-2022. Because my community is part of UK right now, and if we apply for the EU settlement status, we choose to stay and live here, and we want to feel safe how we felt before the Brexit. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, Alexandra, for giving that example from Liverpool, and you'd make a very clear statement that the Roma communities is much a part of these islands as anyone else who is here, and no matter what the future holds on these islands, I can at least know that in my community I'll be standing up as an elected representative for the Roma community along with the Gypsy traveller communities as well. Without further ado though, I do want to go on to Tamara Flanagan from New Europeans. Tamara, I'm grateful that you've been able to hold on the line and talk and introduce some specific data and research that the New Europeans has conducted with the Roma community. So over to you, Tamara.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. With the meeting having finished, I was preparing to wrap up, I'm afraid to say, but it is a preview of, and I won't bother sharing my screen, a report that we've just completed, Digital Status Handled with Care. Like a lot of people on this call, New Europeans began to be worried about the difficulties vulnerable groups, including the Roma, with whom we've worked for about 3 years now, were experiencing with digital status. So we decided over the summer to look into that. We had 500 people that we had helped directly. So we were able to telephone them and ask them about their experience. 300 of them replied. And really, I think the most alarming thing for me wasn't specifically about Roma individuals, but the general difficulty that people have converting from pre-settled to settled status. So our headline figures say 73% of the people we spoke to, 73%, that would be 1.7 million in today's EU money, people have applied, didn't know how to apply for full settled status or when, and hadn't even thought about doing that. So there's a nice big tsunami, Julian, coming down the road about people converting from pre-settled to settled. The other issues that really stood out for us were the 80% of individuals who had needed help from community groups. And this actually mirrors Mihai's figure from 2 years ago when we were talking to him about how many people had needed help with the Bica applications. And it was 80 and it continues to be 80. And the last very alarming figure, 68%, nearly 70% of all people had no idea about how to access their digital status. So this is actually looking forward. The group were Roma Support Group and Italians, and the Italians, whilst being primarily older, were also some younger Italians. So the picture, we think, is pretty universal in terms of converting and accessing digital status. So we're going to be publishing this report in a couple of days. It'll be on our website, and I encourage you to have a look at it. And I think we will want to talk with the Home Office particularly about some of these issues around right to rent and proving status and so forth, where people have been told they don't need to prove any status yet, but in fact are being continually asked to prove their status. And in the report, we have a number of case studies of people who lost their homes or their right to rent a new home and access to other services because they were unable to produce a digital status because they didn't know how. And there were lots of examples in this meeting of coercion, landlords taking charge of emails and passwords and so forth. And it's ironic because the Home Office brought forward the digital status to avoid exploitation, and yet we see the potential for as much, if not more, exploitation. And just to reflect the chair's comment about retaining traditional roots, I think that's got to be a very big message, which I hadn't even thought of today. Retaining traditional routes for people to access status, as well as physical status. Mihai and Settled are both on that platform. We need ID cards and other interventions with government around this. What I think is going to be challenging digital status. The first of its kind, the only other one is DVLA. So if you ever want to rent a car, you might have a bit experience of this, but that's not quite as dangerous as having to prove your immigration status in this country. Thank you for bringing me in.
Tamara, thank you so much. I'm glad we weren't automatically cut off. And I know that people do have questions, and if you could send them in, we will try as the All Party Parliamentary Group to answer as many as possible. But I know that we are over time. And one thing I think is maybe not been highlighted in our discussion this morning is the impact of the Internal Market Bill on the very issues that we have been discussing. And if you're a Roma EU citizen living on the Isle of Ireland and you travel between Dublin to Belfast, you might have a rather different experience if you're in England, Wales or Scotland. So there are going to be a huge lot of challenges with Brexit. I'm not going to say very much more because I don't want to go over some of the ground that I think the vast majority of us would agree on, but I think the challenge for those of us who are parliamentarians is to make sure that the Roma community who live in their communities and their constituencies, that we represent them, that we connect them to those organisations, those respected organisations, community-led organisations, which can make this process as painless as possible. I'm extremely grateful to all of our speakers today. I'm extremely grateful to members of the community who have come forward to highlight the profound issues that they will face in this journey, and to also thank the Secretariat for the All Party Parliamentary Group for organising today's event. And their support for the All Party Parliamentary Group in general goes from strength to strength. And it just finally for me to say thank you so much. Please stay safe. We will be circulating the recording on the website. And again, if you do have questions which have not been answered, please do email us at the All Party Parliamentary Group, friends and families of travellers. And we will try and remain in touch over these very difficult times. So again, thank you all so much indeed. Please stay safe and stay well. Thank you. Bye-bye.